Once upon a time, we didn't really have to worry about the waste we generated or how we got rid of it. There was little in the way of regulations and even less in the way of enforcement. But that was then, and this is now. Over the past 20 years, a revolution in Irish and European law has changed the way in which we deal with our rubbish.
The EPA's report, State of the Environment 2016, looks at the most pressing challenges facing Ireland's environment today.
Reports suggest Ireland is improving and is heading in the right direction. But that's not what we found. Tonight, we reveal an industry where a fragmented system of oversight is struggling to cope.
When we get the impression that waste operators are not living in terror of prosecution.
Brazen acts of environmental criminality. I've never seen anything quite like it.
An industry littered with examples of failure to enforce the legislation.
Citizens, when they're paying for a service to have their waste collected, how confident can they be about where it will ultimately end up?
Where taxpayers have been left to pick up the tab and offenders leave it to others to clean up their mess. Here from RTÉ, I have a few questions about your environmental legacy in Rossbracken. Could you tell us how you're going to pay to clean up the site, Mr. Ferry? Fly tipping is a persistent problem, but most of the time the rubbish is visible and can be removed. More sinister is evidence we've discovered across the country where massive amounts of waste have been buried in illegal dumps. For the past 6 months, RTÉ Investigates has researched the environmental record of the Irish waste industry. We found it to be policed by an extremely fragmented regulatory regime.
The regulatory regime is very complex. It's very technical. The more technicalities there are within a regulatory regime, the easier it is and the more likely it is that there will be loopholes that will emerge.
Waste collectors are regulated by the National Waste Collection Permit Office, exporters by the Transfrontier Shipment Office. Smaller waste sorting facilities are regulated by local authorities, handling everything from wheelie bin waste to scrap metals and demolition materials. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, has direct responsibility for over 100 active large-scale waste handling facilities. And across the country, we found this entire regime prone to conflict with another critical layer of oversight, the planning system.
You have two regimes trying to do two different things, and the local authorities are acting sometimes in a capacity as a planning authority and also acting in a capacity whereby they will have authorised a waste facility permit in relation to it. They find themselves wearing two different hats.
In examining the industry, one significant area repeatedly came to our attention: the western seaboard and the route of the Wild Atlantic Way.
About 90% of the sites that we find are in rural locations, and about 10% will be in urban locations. But I think mainly it's because in urban areas they have witnesses and things get picked up and people notice things happening, where in rural areas there's less witnesses, basically.
The West particularly stood out when we analysed the performance of local authorities over a 3-year period, based on statistics they supplied to the EPA. Here we found vast differences in performance. Over a 3-year period, facilities with waste permits in Wexford were 5 times more likely to face a routine inspection than a facility holding a similar permit in Cork, Limerick or Mayo. A reignited building sector means that construction and demolition waste is number 1 on the list of national enforcement priorities for 2018, because problems are cropping up everywhere. Clifton and District Community Council has planning permission to fill vacant land on Beach Road to build an ambitious new local amenity park. but it did not have a waste permit to bury demolition waste. Here we found electrical items. Reinforced steel. And numerous pieces of broken glass sticking out of the ground. The Beach Road dump of waste was 50 metres from a children's playground. This nearby property on St. Dan's Road did not have a permit either. On site, we found similar waste. There were copybooks, exam packages, school brochures, even school desks. All this had come from one place, the local community school. On November 10th, 2017, Clifton Community School was demolished. A €7.9 million rebuild contract was awarded to leading building firm JJ Rattigan and Company. The demolition work was subcontracted to Maverick Contractors Limited.
That local school demolition job that you demonstrated there, you cannot just pull a building down into one pile of debris. They need to segregate the hazardous from the non-hazardous material, because to dispose of hazardous material is quite expensive.
The Department of Education has confirmed that more than €100,000 of the winning tender was earmarked for demolition and site clearance work.
What I've seen here is everything put into one pile. Paper, cardboard, old school books, carpets, pieces of electrical equipment, pieces of broken glass, and then just crushed and flattened down. The demolition of that school has created a landfill. Actually a landfill.
Days after the demolition, Galway County Council received a dumping complaint and ordered a proper clean-up. Clifton and District Community Council told RTÉ Investigates that clean-up orders were followed and it is intending to apply for a waste facility permit. It said the waste on site did not contain glass or paper. The owner of the St. Dan's Road property did not respond. In response to RTÉ Investigates, the main contractor, JJ Rattigan and Company, said,
despite the fact that the inappropriate actions taken by Maverick relate to a small portion of the overall works involved, we have instructed solicitors to initiate proceedings against them for their breach of contract.
In a statement, Maverick Contractors said, in relation to the handling of waste,
we have acknowledged its importance and liaised extensively with the relevant authorities.
If large-scale infill can change the landscape, so can large-scale digging, as we discovered on the opposite side of Connemara in Ballinrobe. This is Michael Monaghan. He and his wife Anne run a waste collection and sorting operation, Ballinrobe Waste Disposal Limited. Separately, they own a site where an extensive excavation operation is underway. This is a satellite image of the couple's land in 2016, compared with one taken 4 years earlier. This is a video we took of machinery working on the site.
It looks like the land cover has been stripped and there's machinery on site that appears to be digging into the ground and removing it, which in principle is just excavation. Any excavation, as a matter of principle, requires planning permission.
There was no planning permission for this. We contacted Mayo County Council. In response, it confirmed it served an enforcement warning letter on the Monaghans. If Mr. Monaghan had applied for planning permission, it would have raised alarm bells, because the site features on the National Monument Service National Record of Monuments and Places. We asked the Monaghan's about the purpose of the digging, about planning permission and other forms of consent, about environmental screening and assessment, and about the risk to important archaeology. The couple's solicitor told us that their client removed stone to other lands that they owned solely to facilitate land reclamation, that they had not interfered with the monument, and that as the matter is now the subject of a planning enforcement notice, that they will not be commenting until they meet the council.
You have to get permission under the Planning Acts before you do anything. You do need to give the authorities the chance before you do anything to become involved. The general purpose is to ensure that before the works are carried out, the steps necessary to protect the monument can be taken, because a lot of these monuments are in the ground. You know, they're old ring forts and things like that. If you carry out works on them, you're effectively digging them up and they're gone.
We asked the National Monument Service about this, and we understand the matter is now being investigated. Local authorities are responsible for enforcing more than 100 pieces of environmental legislation. But staff inconsistency and capacity have been flagged as problem areas by the EPA. There has been a steady decline in resources, despite the workload remaining consistent. For waste regulation and enforcement, local authorities together employ 150 people. Each year they regulate more than 6,000 waste operations, carry out more than 25,000 inspections, and pursue close to 400 waste prosecutions. The EPA told us it wants local authorities to shift from simply completing numbers of inspections to hit targets and instead deal with the key environmental issues. In the northwest, Donegal County Council emerged as the county that invests the lowest amount of its resources into waste enforcement and regulation. We will be coming back to that in part 2. Some waste sites handle so much rubbish they are regulated by the EPA directly. So as part of our investigation, we looked at 3 big transfer operations with some of the worst non-compliance records in the country.
It may have been a little complacent, assuming that the regime was working very well. I wonder if it is working very well now, when major operators seem to be routinely in receipt of non-compliance notices over serious issues.
First up, close to the Ring of Kerry, was Killarney Waste Disposal, KWD. Situated in sight of Killarney's lakes, it is one of Munster's largest collectors, with its own sorting facility at Ockacareen.
KWD, saving the environment one bin at a time.
In recent years, KWD bought up businesses across Munster. Up to last year, the EPA had its Killarney facility at the top of its national priority list because of its poor record. And there is one clear reason for this: the amount of waste it has taken in. The site is permitted to take in 40,000 tonnes of waste a year. Yet, in that 4-year period, KWD took in 170,000 tonnes more waste than it was allowed.
Everything hinges on what is the volume of waste that actually needs to be dealt with. This isn't just an arbitrary figure which sits in isolation. You change that and you effectively break the system.
The EPA kept highlighting its concerns about KWD's excesses, and all the while, Ockacareen showed the strain. While operating at double its capacity, the activity at the facility resulted in several environmentally significant discharges into the stream, and it faced 50% more compliance investigations than any other waste facility in the country over that period.
Without question, there's obviously got to be a correlation between the problems that have emerged on site in relation to where waste is actually being stored, handled, overflows, all of those issues. The volume on the site has consequences. It presents environmental risks and problems.
In 2010, KWD applied to increase its licence to allow it to handle 59,000 tonnes of waste every year. Still a lot less than what it was actually operating at. That application has been delayed for 8 years, compounded by the EPA differing with Kerry County Council over planning for the site. The company said that while waiting for that licensing decision, it had no alternative destination for its waste.
It is a criminal offence, by definition, to breach a condition of the licence. There's no question about that. A prosecution wouldn't be any regulator's first option. You know, you would seek to persuade and encourage and cajole operators.
KWD opened a new recycling plant in Cork in 2016. It said this helped to significantly reduce activity in Killarney. In a statement, it said the facility was removed from the national priority list in 2017, and it said, all of the non-compliances and compliance investigations referenced in your letter have been addressed to the satisfaction of the EPA. In relation to its oversight of the Aughacrean facility, the EPA told RTÉ Investigates that
it has not tolerated ongoing non-compliance or breaches of tonnage. A file for submission to the DPP in relation to licence breaches, including exceedance of licence tonnage over the period 2013 to 2017, is imminent.
After non-compliance notices and compliance investigations, next in the EPA enforcement arsenal is criminal prosecution. The second largest curbside waste collector in the Dublin market is Greyhound Recycling and Recovery. It runs its own large EPA-licensed facility on Crag Avenue, Clondalkin. The facility has had problems with odours, staff disputes, and separately a High Court civil case found that waste sent from here was dumped in a quarry in Laois. Between 2013 and 2017, the EPA issued Crag Avenue with more non-compliance notices than any other waste site in the country.
The sheer volume of non-compliances that they have been involved with, it begs very, very serious questions about sort of the level of oversight and the commitment, I suppose, to adhere to the licence conditions in the first instance.
But for the EPA to take it further is not easy.
Securing criminal prosecutions in waste management cases can be very difficult. And the reason for this essentially is those type of prosecutions are of a technical nature, and they frequently involve circumstantial evidence.
Despite these obstacles, the EPA has pursued successful prosecutions against the company in the last 4 years. When we looked into these cases, we discovered some disturbing details. A notice was published by the EPA last year to say that Greyhound had pleaded guilty to 5 charges of transferring waste to an unauthorised person and for providing false and misleading information. Files released to RTÉ Investigates told us more about the case. In 2012, 79 tonnes of Greyhound's waste was intercepted on its way to a farm in Roscrea. Inspectors found bales of this waste being burned in a pit and more disposed of in a pond. The trail then led to more discoveries, including 7,900 tonnes of waste at 2 locations in Kildare and at 2 more sites in Laois and West Dublin. Greyhound was fined €25,000 for how it handled this waste. This brought the average fine it received over the last 4 years to €2,500.
The Waste Management Act does provide for very serious penalties, very, very, very significant penalties, up to 10 years imprisonment, almost €13 million in fines maximum. But nothing like these penalties are being imposed by the courts for infringements. So maybe the penalties that are being imposed are not sufficiently dissuasive.
In response to questions, the EPA said,
"The actions we have taken against Greyhound have driven a change in behaviour, However, the EPA continues to closely monitor compliance at the site.
In a statement to RTÉ Investigates, Greyhound blamed its non-compliance history on earlier industrial relations disputes and that these were deeply regretted. It said the court found the dumping in Roscrea had negligible environmental impact and there was no economic gain. The company said important lessons had been learned. After it has tried compliance actions and prosecutions, the EPA's next weapon is to propose stripping a company of its licence because it is not fit and proper. At one point, the EPA threatened to strip Oxygen Environmental of its licence, a company that has earned more than €19 million in the last 5 years from state waste collection contracts. Since 2004, the EPA and 3 local authorities have taken 13 separate successful criminal cases against Oxygen. In 2016, the EPA moved to suspend its licence based on an inspector's report that said Oxygen had failed to demonstrate that they have the requisite technical knowledge and the company is operating its licence in a manner which is causing significant environmental pollution. The report also said it can no longer be regarded as fit and proper.
Some people have been put out of the game by the fit and proper person test. The applicant for the licence or permit must satisfy the authority that they are a fit and proper person, which in summary means that they have the relevant technical qualifications. In addition to that, that they haven't been subject to any convictions under certain specified environmental legislation.
However, Oxygen resisted. It said the EPA has based its suspension on erroneous allegations and criticisms which were not credible. It sought a High Court injunction. The EPA lifted the threat of suspension following a confidential agreement between the EPA and Oxygen that required the company to satisfy financial tests and strictly comply with its licence terms.
This case had a significant public interest. You know, the EPA proceeded on the basis that that there was a seriousness, if you like, to Oxygen's non-compliance, to Oxygen's previous prosecutions, etc., that this was a serious matter.
In a statement, Oxygen said its legal action against the EPA had not concluded, so it would not comment on it. It said despite this, there were no substantive issues with the EPA relating to the operation of any of its sites circa the last 21 to 24 months. The EPA said since it threatened suspension, Oxygen's compliance has improved and
it appears the initiation of suspension procedures has sent a message to the industry and prompted other facilities who are at risk of also having their licences suspended to improve their compliance.
Among the successful prosecutions taken against Oxygen was one for sending waste to an unauthorised facility, this Forest Road in Laois. This land is owned by Sean Doyle, who owns Oxygen Environmental. Documents released to RTÉ under Access to Environmental Information regulations reveal details on the effort to illegally bury the waste. Official returns said that 34,000 tonnes of material was sent from Oxygen's Ballymount facility to Mr. Doyle's farm in Dillonstown, County Louth, where he had a valid waste permit. But it emerged in the High Court that a significant amount of that had actually ended up here in Laois, on a site that enjoys protection as a special area of conservation. A top layer of rubble was mixed with commercial waste. Underneath, a putrid second layer was producing strong leachate. A report presented in court found that hidden underneath the road surface was evidence of asbestos fibres and putrid waste producing carbon at a rate that exceeded the limit values set for waste disposed of to hazardous waste landfills. And all this in a special area of conservation beside the Barrow River. Here, the National Parks and Wildlife Service has jurisdiction, and when one of its staff discovered the dump, their report said it was the largest illegal dump I have ever seen within a site earmarked as a special area of conservation.
If an area is designated as an SAC, these are the most high-value sites. These are recognised as being of very significant importance for biodiversity. Organic matter would produce leachate, and that's likely to contaminate groundwater, surface waters, etc.
Laois County Council was forced to go to the High Court to order Mr. Doyle into a clean-up job he estimated would cost €800,000. In his defence, Mr. Doyle said there was a clerical error in describing the consignments of waste from the Ballyman site.
I object to the use of the term improvised landfill. I decided to use the material for the roadworks on my lands and believed I had all the necessary permissions to do so. That way, I was able to put the material in question to good use.
He also said the EPA record would be corrected. It never was. In court, Oxygen Environmental was fined €2,500 for sending waste to this unauthorised location. In rectifying matters, the company said it removed all material from the site and reinstated the area to its original condition. Coming up in part 2, our discovery of an illegal dump that happened under the noses of authorities and one of the country's worst environmental offenders. The illegal dumping of waste on this island is a cross-border problem. 20 sites identified by the authorities in Northern Ireland were used for illegal cross-border dumping between 2002 and 2004.
No arrests were made today in what has been described as an evidence-gathering operation, but arrests are anticipated in the coming months.
The Irish government had to pay more than €40 million to repatriate the waste to authorised facilities in the south, and the problem is continuing. Details released to RTÉ Investigates show that in the last 3 years, 25 case files have been opened up into illegal waste movements from the south to the north.
It's highly organised. Just about 8,000 tonnes of waste. I mean, that's about $1 million in lost tax revenue. I mean, that's how highly lucrative it is.
The difficulty with waste is that you can bury it, but the problem does not go away. The new owners of this farm at Tamool in Meath had no idea what they were after buying until they got suspicious when the ground started to bubble because of escaping landfill gases. They dug holes and found illegally dumped domestic waste packed below the surface. Meath County Council and the Gardaí got involved, tracing the dumping back to the year 2000. But such was the complexity and cost of the cleanup that it took 13 years to sort out the site. In January, diggers began the arduous task of removing 70,000 tonnes of waste and contaminated soil. Workers excavated black bags full of rubbish, 4 metres deep in places. Meath County Council has had to spend €3.5 million of taxpayers' money to clean up the site. Money was not the only headache. There was nowhere to bring the Tamool waste. Licensed landfills are full, forcing the EPA to reluctantly agree to increase the capacity at the nearby Knockharley landfill. This year, the Department of Communications, Climate Action and the Environment issued the EPA with a stark warning that our current landfill capacity needed to be dealt with as a matter of urgency. It said if demolition waste clogged up landfills, it could cause household bins to remain uncollected, halt the development of housing projects, and risk moving rubbish to illegal sites. Yet more illegal dumps need to be dealt with. We found that this includes some waste brought here illegally from Northern Ireland, like this field in Bridgend, just inside the Donegal border. Last month, it had planning permission extended for a €100 million data centre. But the site has a long history. Back in 1998, Donegal County Council threatened the main landowner with legal action for allowing lorries with waste from Derry to be dumped on the site. Today, an estimated 50,000 tonnes of waste is still buried here.
In 1997, I brought this matter to the attention of the Donegal County Council because I owned and ran a business not half a kilometre away down the road here. And I was deeply concerned at the amount of waste that was coming over on a daily basis in full sight of everyone during the day and coming onto the site and being dumped during that period.
When the data centre was first planned, part of the site was excavated to assess the problem.
When they dug the holes, it was just substantive commercial and household waste. You could see plastic bags, you could see cloth. It was absolutely everything that should not be on this site.
Donegal County Council has been strongly criticised for its handling of the site. In fact, in 2014, the EPA was scathing of the council's failure to investigate Mr. Moyne's complaints.
Donegal County Council failed to perform in a satisfactory manner its statutory functions in relation to environmental protection in relation to the illegal waste deposition site at Bunamain Bridge End.
I most certainly have no confidence in Donegal County Council to act to protect the interests of the environment. We're standing here more than 20 years after this began, and to date nothing has been achieved. Sad for our environment, and I have a very, very low expectation of our council, very low expectation of them.
The Northwest Data Centre Consortium, which represents the landowners, said permitted and authorised infilling of the site commenced in the 1960s and continued up until and including 1998, when all site infilling activity ceased. RTÉ Investigates has reviewed correspondence from several state authorities in the late 1990s, which described the dumping as unlawful, unregulated and unauthorised. Reports filed to support the data centre planning application said material was brought onto the site in the early 2000s. In a statement, Donegal County Council said it was working with the EPA and the department to determine further environmental risks from the site and to identify remedial measures. This is sapping resources from a council already dealing with some of the worst illegal dumping this country has seen. This is Lough Swilly. It lies between the Inishowen and Fonad peninsulas in northern Donegal, in a special area of conservation along a stretch of the wild Atlantic Way. It is one of Ireland's few glacial fjords. If you follow this river back from the loch for just a few hundred metres, you arrive at Rosbracken, the scene of one of the worst cases of illegal dumping in the country in recent years. There is an estimated 36,000 tonnes of waste buried on this 11-acre site. Last September, these sheds packed with waste went on fire. The charred runoff ran into the protected river, along with the leachate seeping from the buried waste. Jim Ferry is responsible for the Rosbracken dump, a site the council says is an unmitigated environmental disaster. Over 2 decades, Mr. Ferry's companies grew to become one of Donegal's biggest waste collectors. At the same time, he is one of the most persistent and significant environmental offenders in the country. In late 2016, Donegal County Council, acting on a complaint from the Irish Waste Management Association, raided Rosbracken. The High Court later ordered him or his companies to pay to remove the buried waste, but Mr. Ferry had other ideas. He went on the run, holing up a mile across the Northern Irish border.
The guards raided a number of properties, I believe, the start of this week. The High Court has said he is to be arrested and he is to be brought immediately to prison until he purges his contempt.
Before he left, Jim Ferry sold his collection business for more than €400,000. He has told the High Court this could not be used towards the cleanup because it was frozen. The buyer was Wheelie Environmental Services Limited, WERS for short, who said it bought his trucks, hired his staff and took on his collection routes, promising a professional, affordable service. It took over the business on August 1st, 2017. WERS' move to Donegal happened at a time when it had problems of its own in Tuam. For years, WERS has been pursued by Galway County Council for running its Tuam waste transfer site without proper planning permission or, more recently, a valid permit.
Around 2008, they started to put on extra buildings. When we checked to see if there was planning permission, there was no planning permission on it. But then they started extending. To date, roughly, they would have 60,000 square feet, and the final building that they put on, over a weekend, they actually drilled into the uprights in my building and attached their final building onto it.
Galway County Council took WERS to court. As a result, it was forced to demolish 2 of these sheds and reduce the size of its operation before the council would grant the company a waste permit. However, locals continue to be concerned at what the environmental impact of the facility has been for the last 10 years.
The Clare River runs along the front of our factory here and Weir's factory. The Clare River runs into Lough Corrib, which is the main water supply for 80,000 to 100,000 people in Galway City. It beggars belief that initially that permission was given to a recycling facility there on a floodplain in Tuam.
When we looked into WERS, we found further problems. Its annual report to regulators had underdeclared the amount of waste it brought to its Tuam site by more than 70%. Some of its bin lorries were not authorised for use on its permit, and it had underreported the amount of waste sent to its transfer site in Donegal last year by 20%. When we put this to WERS, it said these were administrative errors and they would be corrected with the authorities. WERS blamed the administrative backlog on its expansion in Donegal. It said that its priority was
to provide continuity, and we have played our part in helping to give parts of Donegal a proper waste service that is compliant.
Local councils are responsible for a lot of environmental enforcement. As part of our investigation, we compared each local authority's activity rates for the years 2014 to 2016. Donegal's rate was particularly low. Our analysis also showed it spent less than its peers on waste regulation. In a statement, the council said,
"It does not accept our analysis reflects its overall work, but that it has secured funding to hire extra staff."
One of the sites it regulates is a facility far north on the Wild Atlantic Way, just outside Moville, on the northeastern tip of the Inishowen Peninsula. The facility is located within a large quarry, operated by Davy Transport Limited, but the waste permit is effectively confined to the large shed on site. Davy Transport is a well-established skip hire company, owned and controlled by 2 brothers, Lawrence McDade and Eamon McDade. On paper, it has one of the strictest facility permits in the country, requiring it to file weekly reports of all waste it accepts and ships out. We tried to get access to Davy Transport's waste returns, but were unsuccessful. So we had a look ourselves. We found abuses across a wide range of its waste handling activities. Recently, these used mattresses arrived in an unauthorised collection vehicle. A few days later, and we found the charred remains of mattresses washed down and the filthy water running off into the quarry. Elsewhere, we found tyre tracks had cut into the ground during wet weather. This exposed layers of glass, soft plastics, and bottles encased in the ground. Another large area looked like vegetation from the air, but even this was only a carpet sitting on top of recyclables, paper, and other domestic waste. In a newer pile, branches and scrub were stacked together, thinly disguising an array of recently discarded waste, including household rubbish. It didn't end there. In piles around the site, there were discarded toys, electrical items, oil drums, paint tins, and numerous other types of rubbish. As part of our investigation, we examined satellite imagery to gauge the scale of activity over the past number of years. There was one particular location in the remotest corner beyond the quarry where significant changes in the landscape were occurring. While Storm Emma's snowfall was still thawing, we trekked up to the site. The first thing we saw were large man-made mounds. As we got closer to them, we began to appreciate the scale of the site. They were made of thousands of tons of material. Even then, we had no comprehension of the scale of what lay before us. This particular mound had been partly worn away by a winter stream. As a result, with a little effort, we were able to cut through the soil surface. Quickly, we discovered clothes, carpets, curtains, discarded wrappers. The winter stream had allowed us to dig into this mound, unlike other mounds around it, which remain intact. And around these mounds lay piles of exposed dump material. It was when we got to the top of that mound that we could see almost 200 other mounds stretched out in front of us. The change in landscape for this area overlooking Moville has been dramatic. What we discovered all suggested systematic illegal dumping going back up to 10 years.
It really would make one feel sad as to where society is heading when such brazen acts of environmental criminality happen. Frankly, I'm surprised. I've never seen anything quite like it. I've never seen anything remotely like it, I have to say. It would leave one speechless. I mean, that parcel of land is no good for any future use, I would suggest. And it looked to have been very scenic at the outset. So, I mean, aesthetically, it's horrendous. It's unforgivable. As to the potential contamination of groundwater, we don't know what is contained in that waste because it's not characterised. What I did notice were pieces of plastic, old clothes, old shoes, I think, old boots, a lot of plastic, some metallic wastes. I mean, genuinely, it's appalling.
The piles of waste were in clusters. Food waste we unearthed had sell-by dates of 2013. Others had dates right up to this year. This was evidence of a prolonged activity, which we now learned happened despite investigations by the authorities. When we reported our findings to the EPA, it said it was not the first time the Moville site was on its radar. It received a complaint in 2011 and asked Donegal County Council to investigate.
The EPA received a telephone complaint alleging that Davies Skip Hire was burning skip waste in a quarry owned by them 3 or 4 nights per week. The EPA instructed the council to investigate the matter. The council replied to say that they had visited the site and could not find any evidence of burning and that they would monitor the site.
The council told us it had carried out a number of inspections of the facility. In relation to its enforcement of planning and waste regulations, it said it had issued a warning letter to Davy Transport in April this year for accepting household waste because the facility's planning permission was confined to construction and demolition material. The council sent this warning letter even though it was its own environment section who had permitted Davy Transport to sort household waste in the Moville facility. The council said investigations by it and other agencies have commenced into the new matters brought to its attention by RTÉ Investigates. In a statement, the company said it is fully committed to its responsibility to protect the environment, and that commitment is reflected across the activities of Davy Transport Limited. It said at all times it has cooperated with Donegal County Council and has taken steps in recent days to rectify poor housekeeping at the request of the council. A short distance away, we discovered another way the same organisation disposes of waste. We found this unauthorised infill with a road apparently built using demolition waste blended with plastics, packaging, and even electrical items. At this location, we saw vehicles from Davy Transport's facility tipping their loads over the steep edge of the site. We witnessed truck after truck dumping the cover material down the slope that banks onto the Breda River, already flagged to be one of 6 in the country with the lowest water quality. We recovered a sample of the material and got an expert opinion.
I handled a piece of it that was taken as a sample, and it's definitely marl. The water will gradually erode it because it's only soft clay. And downstream, you will have elevated levels of fine particulate matter in the water.
What does that mean?
It means that the water becomes unsuitable for fish. So if you have marl dumped where water from the rain can wash it into a stream, then you are causing problems downstream for the fisheries.
We wrote to Davy Transport Limited and the owner of the site, asking them to explain the activity on the land, but we got no response to this question. Afterwards, we visited the site and it was being covered over with a layer of topsoil. Donegal County Council said it is investigating it. May 2018, back at Rossbracken, the gates finally seem shut for business. The council has spent €721,000 removing all the surface waste and cleaning up after the fire. We asked Donegal County Council about its handling of this case. In a statement, the council said the Rossbracken site was
completely different in scale to anything that had gone before. But once cleaned up, it will be pursuing the recovery of the costs involved from the responsible parties.
That pursuit took it back into the High Court last Tuesday when it was awarded a judgment against Mr. Ferry for the cost of cleaning the surface waste. It asked Mr. Justice Max Barrett to jail Mr. Ferry until he fully explained where all his money had gone. Jim Ferry is a serial environmental offender. Since 1999, the council has prosecuted him 9 times. At different points, his waste was buried at sites around Falcarra, near Manor Cunningham, and around his yard in Rossbracken. His most recent convictions relate to this incident in 2010. That is his household truck, full of domestic waste. It is driven into a field he owns opposite his mother's home, and it's emptied onto the ground for a waiting digger to cover over. He was fined just €3,000 for what was caught on camera. That was doubled because his truck was caught doing the same thing 6 days later. Last week, Mr. Ferry turned up in the High Court, where his barrister argued if he was guilty of anything, he was guilty of complete and utter stupidity. He said Mr. Ferry was uneducated and customers frequently left out very heavy bins, which he was not paid for, so he buried the excess. Mr. Justice Barrett gave him 2 weeks to explain how much he is worth and what he did with an estimated €3.6 million he gained by illegally burying the waste in Rossbracken. He faces jail if he fails to do this. Mr. Ferry said he was going to declare bankruptcy, so we caught up with him to ask who was going to clean up his mess. Hello, Mr. Ferry. Conor here from RTÉ. I have a few questions about your environmental legacy in Rossbracken. Could you tell us how you're going to pay to clean up the site, Mr. Ferry?
And what else?
What do you say to the law, Mr. Ferry? Burying waste in remote spots, like a field close to the border or along the banks of an estuary, is not a permanent solution to the country's urgent waste problem. Buried waste doesn't just disappear when you put it into a hole in the ground. And this beach in Bray, County Wicklow, bears testimony to that. Until 1967, this site was Bray's municipal dump. More than 100,000 cubic metres of waste are buried here. The soft, sandy cliffs took a battering during recent harsh winters. Steady erosion is exposing the dump and sending the waste onto the beach, including asbestos tiles.
There's quite a mixture of things here. You can see clothing, could be a scarf. I would say it's an old cooker. This would look to me like a plastic shower curtain. Looks like a part of a doll. What appears to be an asbestos roofing. We're getting sea level rise, and we're getting stronger storms. So as this process goes on, the rate of erosion will increase. A lot of that landfill will be removed by the sea over the next 15 or 20 years, as the erosion proceeds even faster.
In fact, a series of reports by various consultants predict that half the dump area and its contents will be washed into the sea within 50 years.
Well, the problem is this is a historic landfill. If asbestos is in a piece of land which is being eroded by the sea, with the possibility, in fact, the very strong likelihood, that the asbestos will be moved around, will be broken up by the action of the waves and by the falling cliff face, then you can get airborne asbestos fibres, and they are the dangerous ones.
Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council has said it is consulting with all parties to try find a long-term solution and hopes to bring proposals forward for public consultation before the end of this year. The EPA has been told that neither Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council or Wicklow County Council has a budget to carry out the necessary work, and sources of finance need to be identified. All the while, increasing amounts of waste are being washed into the sea as the waves continue to erode the cliffs, exposing more and more of the landfill.
I think there's a legacy of waste problems going back a long way. Clearly, what has been seen and discovered so far is only the tip of the iceberg. There are decisions being made today about waste which will haunt us in 20, 30 years' time.